We continue part 6 with chapter 4, Jesus on his last circuit. Is this chapter 33? When Jesus reached Bethany, he found that Lazarus had begun already 4 days in the tomb. It would seem that when the messenger was dispatched by the sisters, Lazarus was still living. Such their message implied. It was, therefore, satisfactory and consolatory to the messenger to hear Jesus say that sickness was not unto death. He must have been greatly surprised when he returned and found Lazarus buried. And if he delivered the message to the sisters, they must have been sorely perplexed, for Lazarus had died in the meantime. There's been a couple people in recent decades that were buried like a month and were alive. But, not embalmed and other stuff that would have destroyed the body, but like the messenger must have seemed to them to show that Jesus had lost his way. He said that this sickness was not unto death at the very moment when Lazarus was in his grave, for the Jews made haste to bury their dead out of their sight, and a prompt interment was intended to be an honor to the deceased. For proof that it was customary to bury the dead on the day of their death, see Acts 5, verse 6 and 10, and John's Archaeology, Volume 1, page 2. In hot countries, it is necessary to bury promptly because of the rapid decomposition, and in cold countries and other countries too, for different reasons, and the Jews had the additional reason of being fearful of defilement by reason of contact with the corpse. Now, in hot countries, perhaps the corpse could dry out better than in moderate. Moderate is probably the highest risk, right? Even now in Jerusalem, the burial, as a general rule, is not deferred for more than 3 or 4 hours, and if the death occurs so late in the evening, the burial cannot take place that night, it is performed at the earliest break of day. And in the Islamic view, somebody's buried the same day too. But the afternoon prayer is when the funeral is held. So, one of the afternoon prayers, but not one of the 3 ones at night. Not the evening, not the dusk, not the dawn. When this message came to Martha and Mary, it must have been a double blow. They had such love for Lazarus and such confidence in the power of Jesus, and now Lazarus was dead and Jesus was mistaken, or if not mistaken, he did not regard them enough to come and explain his dark sayings. So it seemed to them Lazarus must have died the day the messenger left for Perea and been buried before sundown. That journey occupied a day. Jesus spent 2 other days in Perea, and the 4th was given to the journey to Bethany, so that when he arrived, it was the 4th day that the corpse of Lazarus had been buried in the grave. The sorrow of this stricken family had called to them their neighboring friends, and also many Jews from Jerusalem, some undoubtedly sincerely sympathizing with these afflicted young women, others simply going through the ceremonies of condolence in a perfunctory manner, and others perhaps desirous of bringing back into the fold of orthodoxy these excellent women who had been turned aside by the fascination and friendship of the young heresiarch of Nazareth. Heretic, basically. There was a crowd in the house. Martha, always busy and bustling, was in a position to hear of the approach of Jesus, and she hastened to meet him. Mary was sitting quiet in the house. The traits of character in each came out under the new and exciting circumstances of the arrival of Jesus. Martha met him first, and the words that burst from her lips indicate what had been the thoughts and probably the sayings of the sisters in his absence. Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died. This speech is a study. Martha had ample opportunity to investigate the character of Jesus, and had seen him both fatigued and rested, had noticed him gazing in reverie far into the air or down the mountain slope as he sat before the door of her house, and heard him when he was engaged in conversation with Lazarus, or some of the disciples had watched his intercourse with Mary, noticed, conversation, the other part's not to be watched, notice as only woman's quick eye can notice all his movements about the house, his dress and address, his dispositions of himself, his oft-guarded moods, his temper under provocation, and all those things which have been said to make a man cease to be a hero to his valet. The whole impression made upon her mind was that he was so holy as to have most intimate communion with God, such intimacy as gave him most extraordinary power, such power as would have enabled him even to push back death and keep her brother alive. But she did not know, it would seem, of the miracles he had wrought in restoring other persons to life, and did not imagine such a possibility as the resurrection of her brother. To Martha, Jesus was a divine personage, but not deity. Well, sanctioned by God is what they mean. It didn't seem that any of these people took him as a literal son of God, or part of God or something. To the saying, "If you had been here, my brother had not died," he added, probably after a pause and a sob, "Even now I know that whatever you will ask of God, God will give it to you." What she expected him to ask of God is not apparent. She was in the tumult of a fresh and great bereavement, swayed by hopes and fears and griefs. The spiritual elevation of every person who came within the circle of his influence was manifestly the design of all that Jesus did and said. To give back her brother simply was merely to indulge Martha's natural desires for a season, leaving her still in great distress because her brother might be snatched from her again at any moment. Her suffering, in that case, would have been such as Wordsworth, in his fine poem of La Damia, has described to have been that of his heroine when the shade of Protesilaus was restored to her for a brief time and then withdrawn. As Olshausen has well said, it was needful that Martha should so recover her brother that it would be impossible to never lose him again, and thus become rooted with him in the element of the imperishable. Jesus proceeded not simply to restore her brother, but to furnish her with a remedy against all forms in which death could possibly assault humanity, bodily or spiritually. Jesus said to her, "Your brother shall rise again." Martha replied, "I know that he shall rise again at the resurrection, at the last day." It is to be noticed that she speaks of the resurrection as a doctrine currently received, and as including the restoration to life of all dead men, simply in virtue of their being men and being dead, and also that this was to be accomplished for all the race at the last day. As if she had said, "Of course, as he has shared the fate of all men in dying, he shall share the fate of all men in rising." But Jesus taught her another doctrine and advanced a most prodigious claim for himself. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes on me, even if he were dead, shall live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall not ultimately die." He removes from the plane of natural causes both life and the resurrection, and declares that the power of both resides in him, that he is the dynamical force of life, and without him no one who is dead can possibly be restored, and that those who are alive and have connection with him cannot finally perish. He represents himself as the fountain of soul life and of the animal life that is in man. He is the life, he is the lifeness itself. If it bring himself to bear upon the dead they live, if he bring himself to bear upon the living, so long through the ages as this remains, they are not able to die. He is the resurrection for Lazarus, and he is the life for Martha. Upon this, he appealed to her. Do you believe this? Martha did not unequivocally express her faith in this startling and immense claim, but she did reply, I've reached the belief that you are the Christ, the Anointed One, the Son of God. Well, an intelligence of God, again, that Al or Yah would have been at the end, right? That was to come into the world. It was a noble thing in her not to give hasty assent to what she could neither understand nor believe. Jesus had uttered something too deep for her, and then startled her by the sudden question, do you believe all this? She could not say whether she did or not, because she was not sure that she quite apprehended the meaning. But she did believe that he was the Messiah. And if she did, then, if you omniwal, Christos, it all denies the idea of him being literally a deity or anything like that, and was quite ready to say that much. If that meant what Jesus meant, then yes, Lord. If not, then nay, Lord. Not yet that much, but I have believed and do believe that you are the Messiah. Having said this, she went her way and privately sought Mary, not choosing to let the Jews from Jerusalem know that Jesus was so near, for she must have known the intensity of the malignant hatred of the Jews towards Jesus. She said to Mary, the Master is here and calls for you. When Mary heard this, she arose quickly and came to him. Jesus had not come to the house, nor indeed to the village, but was near, perhaps between the house and the burial place. When the Jews who were in the house and had been endeavoring to comfort her saw Mary rising up hastily and go out, they followed her, thinking that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary reached Jesus, she fell at his feet, an act of homage which Martha had not paid, an expression of adoring love, perhaps brought suddenly from her by the recollection that she had been sitting in the house while her dear friend was so near. She exclaimed, Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died. In the identity of this speech with that of Martha, both coming out in the great emotion of the first meeting, we see what had been the tenor of their conversation in the absence of the dear friend. It was the unfortunate absence which occasioned all their trouble. The confidence in Jesus of these two women who were so different in temperament is really affectingly beautiful. The outburst of Mary stirred the hearts of the Jews who had come to mourn with her, and they wept. When Jesus saw this deep emotion, he was vehemently agitated. The language of the original history of John 9:33, and actually it appears there's pre-Christian Gospels before, well, at least, pre-John Gospels and post-John Gospels, and John was edited so much. Can we say that the Gnostic Gospels and stuff were before John, because the John that we have is edited at that point? And those ones aren't so, stopped being edited at a much earlier time. But anyways, it admits a complex mental condition, a combination of grief and anger. He grew wroth in his spirit and disturbed himself. His sympathies were intense. He loved Mary. He could not endure to see her suffer so keenly. These were reasons for tears, but why should he be so angry? That is not so easy to answer. Neither Mary nor the Jews had done anything on this occasion to arouse his indignation. It was absurd to suppose that the mere death of Lazarus had produced this state of feeling, or because he had any regrets for his own absence when Lazarus died, because he believed that he was about to raise him from the dead, and he had said to his disciples that he was glad he was not present at the death, because he knew that it was for the glory of God. We cannot very clearly discern good reason for his anger, but he was angry. It may be that an intense perception of all the wrong that sin was working in the race came upon him, or, well, in humanity, perhaps. His tribe, surely, yeah, right. And any of those things apply. Yeah, that's right. And the discords and jangles of the world broke out on his sensitive soul with a force that excited him violently. And that's one of the things that you saw in Muhammad. He was very upset about, the state of his people's acceptance of what's good and true. But it was only for him to convey. If this be not the explanation, we do not know what it is. But it is quite clear that the historian describes him as angered. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. On the way to the sepulchre, the company noticed that manly tears were silently flowing down the cheeks of Jesus, like a shower of soft rain after a thunderclap. Something had angered him. Now he was weeping. Some of the Jews said to others, "See how he loved him?" And then, recollecting the case of the blind man in Jerusalem, whom Jesus had restored to sight, they said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have caused even this man should not have died?" It must be noticed that this remark shows that the restoration of the blind man had been settled as a fact in the popular opinion of Jerusalem. The spectators saw in Jesus unmistakable signs of affection for Lazarus. He had shown great power in the case of the blind man. Did his ability to save stop at that limit? In that case, he had been criticized for doing too much, here for doing too little. The anger of Jesus rose again, exploded in a groan, rather than in a verbal reply to their foolish gainsaying. And it's a view of Jerusalem from the spot where Jesus wept over the city. So which side is hell on? Gehenna. Seriously, it's actually a metaphor for, that stinking garbage heap and stuff. Maybe that's the nice side, because that doesn't look too bad. But things are different nowadays. They came to the tomb. It was a cave. A stone lay against it. Jesus said to them, "Take the stone away." Martha shrank from the exposure and expostulated, "Lord, already she said with instinctive shuddering and painful reluctance, "stinketh, for he has been buried 4 days." Here was a conflict between her faith in the friendly power of Jesus and her natural, desponding disposition. She did not know that putrefaction had begun. The word "for" shows that she had merely inferred it from the length of time her brother had been in the tomb. Jesus reassured her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you should see the glory of God?" Now see, he wasn't really dead, but in a coma, because nobody knew of any rotting that was going on. Then they removed the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I know that thou hearest me always. But because of the multitude which stand around, I said this, that they may believe that thou hast sent me." This remarkable speech seems to be the utterance of a sentiment of internal spiritual communication and not a prayer in the form of petition, although Jesus did make such prayers. Well, what? He's praying to himself? Is that the argument to do away with the, because whenever Jesus prays, it's like, well, he's praying to God, right? Just like we pray to God and use terms of God being the center and the pole and the provider and, other meanings for the word Father, the word that we usually render as Father, right? This was no show prayer. It was a Eucharist, a thanksgiving, such as was in his heart. Eucharist? Is an indication that, we're looking at some Gnostic meaning for the Father, Son, Holy Spirit stuff, which is not some Christian Trinity thing, but They eventually separated Apraxis, Barbelo, and Averamento. It was a Eucharist, a thanksgiving, such as was in his heart, and he chose to utter it, that the people hearing it might believe that he was the sent of God, the Christ, the Messiah, or at least perceive that he believed himself to be such. The raising of the dead was the experimentum crucis, the final and indisputable test and proof of messiahship. He accepted it as such. He had raised the dead at least twice before in the case of the daughter of the nobleman and the son of Nain, son of the Nain widow, but never under the circumstances like these, in which the deceased was an adult, had been dead and buried, now the fourth day, and spectators from Jerusalem, the seat of ecclesiastical authority, not the same thing as church, and of enmity to Jesus, were present in a crowd sufficient to examine all the phenomena of the miracle and to detect collusions and tricks. They were certain that Lazarus was dead. It could not have been an arrangement upon the part of these young women and Jesus. His whole character was such that not only would he not have entered into such arrangement, but if they had desired to glorify the great teacher by getting a pseudo-miracle, he would never, for the sake of friendship, have yielded himself unwillingly to be part of such a scheme. Moreover, the grief of Martha and Mary, as well as that of Jesus, was not feigned. If it had been, the Jews, who had 3 days for observation, would have detected it. So they think, right? They were so thoroughly convinced of the death of Lazarus that they themselves wept with Mary and admired the tenderness of the friendship of Jesus. It was the crisis of Jesus. He stood before the open tomb and with a loud voice cried, "Lazarus, come forth." And then he who had been dead came forth in just such plight as corpses were customarily laid away in the grave, namely with narrow strips of linen wrapped about each limb, so that while the motion was obstructed, it was not impracticable, and with a handkerchief tied about his head. So thorough was the restoration that he needed no aid to obey the command of Jesus, but walked forth into the presence of the assembly. Jesus simply said, "Loose him and let him go." That is, take away whatever encumbers him and let him go home. One cannot fail to notice the absence of all parade and mumbling and incantation as if this were the work of a magician. Well, just because there's spiritual formulas being said, it's like continue remembrance here. That's just like the Bible and their Chaldean thing. That isn't. Don't call them Chaldeans. Kesh D instead of, because they perform the Kushti. They pray 5 times a day, and no, that must be giving them powers. It's like, well, in a way, but no. The history is beautiful on the side of the human passions, and sublime on the side of the simple exercise of power in doing what only God has always been supposed to be capable of performing. See, Jesus is always putting the power and the message on the one who sent him. So if he was deity or part deity, you think he'd have his own doctrine and power and stuff, right? There is no indulgence of curiosity, no telling of tales brought back from the prison house of the sepulchre, no marvels, no self-gratulation upon the part of